spot at the table as the majority. They deserve a seat at the table, but the majority deserves a larger, percentage of seats.
And so, yeah, it's interesting that you brought up kind of this divide and how it's becoming politicized, and it kind of seems like I think I've kind of seen it in my lifetime, but prior to maybe recent political events, the environment really wasn't a political issue. I mean, Nixon founded the EPA. There really wasn't a politicization of this issue, but it seemed like once people started talking about global warming, once it started coming to climate change, the political divide became even more significant. Even in the last couple of years, is that the kind of partisan divide or the
politicization?
What she said, yes.
And this trend towards politicizing the views of scientists, which scientific views are not, they're not opinions. And for them to be disseminated to the scientific community, they need to be objective. They're very rarely qualitative facts. They're quantitative facts that are based on data collection and based on scientists taking an idea through the scientific method, it being vetted through a peer review process, and coming out the other end as a fact-checked, objective statement. And the way that politicians frame a lot of these issues is that these are opinions of people who have a vested interest in getting grants is dangerous. And that, unfortunately, has been very persuasive recently, as we see from the statistics that you've laid out here.
Yeah, and beyond, going like one level beyond just what the statistics say, look at the way in which it's framed. In the when they divide the groups, what are those names for the groups? It calls them the true believers.
Well, I think in this study, even how questions are presented, it's do you believe this or do you believe that? Is that kind of where you're getting to?
No, I found it. So the way that the Gallup analysis, they grouped the supporters and the deniers into different groups, and they named them. So they named the supportive group concerned believers, and they called the least supportive group the cool skeptics, and then they had the mixed middle. And this was part of the Gallup, aggregation of this information.
Well, it's kind of how they're using organizing the data.
Yeah, they're organizing the data, but they're using belief
as
a title, which is, as far as journalism goes, it's actually accurate because, as Sam says, it has been so skewed into an opinion issue that it makes sense to describe climate change, global warming in terms of belief, unfortunately, when it shouldn't. It's really similar to being like, oh, hey, Mitch, do you believe your car is going to run in the morning? Because that's the same exact scientific process that developed all the sorts of technology that we rely on every day. And it's kind of ludicrous to think that someone will look up from their iPhone for 2 seconds to tell you that they don't believe in global warming.
Right. And maybe on a little bit of a happier, getting to a little bit of a happier topic, but some of the things that we're trying to do to prevent continued climate change or to halt global warming is renewable energy. Do you study renewable energy and what that's going to do for the environment? Is there an actual way in which we're going to be able to turn the tide of global warming, and that renewable energies are going to be our savior, or do you see it as no, we just have to kind of eliminate carbon emissions?
I have no idea.
We're only in week 3 of energy law.
Oh, okay.
So that's actually true. Hannah and I are both taking energy law. Great class. But renewable energy is something that has become also a politicized issue. Whether or not whether or not it's worth the effort to start transitioning away from carbon-producing energy towards renewable energy. But renewable energy also comes with its own consequences. So global warming may not be one of those consequences. Renewable energy is touted as being able to mitigate global warming, but there are all sorts of consequences with dams interrupting the hydrological cycle of various streams and disrupting various ecosystems, and that creates hydropower, and hydropower is a huge producer of energy. With wind turbines causing all sorts of nuisances for communities, but also killing birds. There are land use issues with any sort of renewable energy. Also, solar is a big consumer of land, but solar could potentially go in deserts. We have an issue with transporting the energy that we create.
Mm-hmm.
So we need a lot to be done in the realm of battery technology to be able to store energy.
Isn't that an issue too with like having these batteries and like saying like Priuses and stuff? I mean, having a Prius with a lithium battery or whatever. I mean, you still have to mine all these materials, and there's a process in making these batteries which is just as detrimental, or could be argued that is very detrimental to the environment as well.
Absolutely, and a lot of them, a lot of the metals that are involved with creating transformers, creating batteries, are rare metals. A lot of those are mined in developing countries where there's enormous consequences, where there's very little environmental oversight and oversight for workers, and there's incredible consequences.
Well, I'm sure, and then I'm sure maybe you're probably following along. The House in Minnesota just passed a bill about that they're passing looser mining laws in the boundary waters.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know much about it. I was just kind of following the headlines, but I didn't know if you knew more about it or what their intentions are.
Well, I don't know too much about the developing law right now.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that there was a moratorium that was recently lifted.
Okay, so that's the bill from last year. But there was the most recent development is there was a moratorium placed during the Obama administration on, was it permitting, a moratorium on permitting?
Yeah, even starting the permitting process.
Yeah, even starting.
And I don't understand the details. What I do understand is that nothing has really happened other than that moratorium is lifted. So the mines still need to go through the permitting process, and the permitting process is extremely extensive. But the real problem, I think, with those mines in general, again, is like an education issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Minnesotans really appreciate how these mines, these sulfur ore mines, are different than mining that has been traditionally done in Minnesota to great effect. So Minnesota has a long history of being very successful at mining and driving a real economic boom in the Iron Range with mining. That was not sulfur ore mining. That is very, very different consequences. Sulfur ore mining is you mine nickel and copper or whatever metals from sulfur-bearing ore. And so the nickel and copper, which is trying to be mined in Minnesota, is a very low percentage. It's like 1% of the actual material in the sulfur ore. And over the course of a lot of volume, there's an enormous wealth to be made and an economic boom to be had. But what happens is when you open up sulfur ore to oxygen and water, which is what you do when you break open the dirt, a chain reaction occurs, a chemical reaction occurs where the water and the oxygen combine with the sulfur, creates sulfuric acid. That sulfuric acid then dissolves the metals around it. And so this isn't a big problem when the mine is active. It'll be however productive the mine is going to be. The mining company will harvest its metals, and eventually it's going to get to a point where it's no longer economically viable. At that point, the mine will close down, but the water and the oxygen will still seep into the mine. It'll react with the sulfur-bearing compounds. It'll create sulfuric acid. That sulfuric acid will continue to mine the mine. The mine will never stop mining itself. This is not a problem. It's not something that's going to be solved within 20 or 30 years. It's something that's going to take a geological time frame for the mine to stop mining itself.
So basically, once they start, it's going to start a chain reaction. It's not going to be able to stop itself.
It's never going to stop until the mining company can create a sufficient cap so that no more water or oxygen gets into the
so
mine.
filling the mine with dirt and stuff isn't not a good enough precaution to stop the process.
No, that's not going to do enough. So, for example, there was recently the Gold King mine spill, which occurred in Colorado, I think 2015, where there was a sulfur ore mine. The mine, when it was no longer productive, was capped in the front, so the mine entrance was closed. Snow melt and rain seeped into the mine. It filled up all of the caverns in the mine. It continued to mine itself over decades and decades and decades. So it broke down the walls. It extracted all sorts of toxic compounds, because nickel and copper and your minerals of interest, they never occur just alone. There's also arsenic in there. There's lead. There's cadmium. There's manganese. These things are really dangerous to human health.
Heard of arsenic?
Yeah.
Not good.
So how many
for ya.
people do you think know about the aftermath of mining these types of materials?
The sulfur ore mining, I don't think it's really well understood how it's different than other mines.
Because this
it's
is
not-
the first
it's
time
not-
I've ever
news to
heard.
me
This
as
is the
well.
first time I've ever heard of how this mining practice affects
Yeah.
going down the
It's
line.
a problem that, like, when you're done with the mine, the mine has a life of its own, and it keeps going. And this is a problem in the Boundary Waters for a number of reasons.
Right.
A very simple problem is once the mine fills up with the sulfuric acid, which it's going to do, and it's going to contain all sorts of various minerals in it. These metals are extremely toxic to aquatic life.
Right.
So things that are not toxic to humans, like copper in normal doses or nickel in normal doses, are actually toxic to anything with gills. Zinc is another example. So it essentially prevents oxygen exchange over gills, and so and they're toxic at extremely low parts per billion concentrations. Not to mention that the cadmium, arsenic, lead, these kind of hot topic, very dangerous metals to human health, they're also dangerous to the aquatic community also. And that's not something that is going to stop after the mining is decommissioned. And the mine, particularly Twin Metals, is being run by a subsidiary of a multinational mining company. And these multinational mining companies usually set up subsidiaries to mine so that when a mine is shut down, when there are environmental consequences, that subsidiary claims bankruptcy and is no longer economically responsible for the environmental consequences. And so when you have a sulfur ore mine that is going to be an environmental issue for hundreds of years after the decommission, there is no reasonable expectation that the mining company is going to be there to take care of it. And the only way to actually solve the problem is either to do an incredible job capping, which is going to require maintenance on a very regular basis. But
Probably
more
a significant
realistically,
amount of resources, right?
an enormous amount of resources, and it's not really being realistically done in many places, or to have a water treatment facility put in. And so that's being done all over the West, where water treatment facilities are being put in where there's more sulfur ore mining. And those are legitimate, like many millions of dollars to build a water treatment facility to filter out these metals, and then also an enormous upkeep and maintenance cost.
Right.
So this is a little bit different than Iron Range mining.
Well, that was lighter.
Yeah, definitely.
And more-
So speaking of toxic, Hannah and you are all actually in a class together, right?
Several.
Yeah.
Several classes?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what is, I mean, it just must be a treat for you to be in a class with Hannah.
We
So-
actually sit next to each other in energy law.
oh man, that
Yeah.
must
We
that
do.
must
We
be
were in
great.
the same section, Section C. Shout out,
Wow.
best section.
And so
wow.
what has it been like being in the same class as Hannah? Is it just invigorating or?
It is invigorating. Once
You don't have to say it's okay. I won't. I won't shove you into a
we
locker.
were
like that
having
thing.
a conversation once in constitutional law, and we were talking about environmental standing, and whether animals should have standing to bring a suit in court. And the professor we brought up an example about pandas, and the professor asked, who out there will stand for pandas? And this was a rhetorical question, and Hannah was like, I will stand for pandas. And I was jazzed about that. That was,
It did become the panda did kind of become our class mascot after that.